In this lesson, we'll look over the sketch overlay and start to model the new massing. Now, since the end of the last lesson, the building itself on the platform had been rotated by 180 degrees. The platform itself did not move. The reason why I did this is because I wanted the entrance area to be on this side where the shorter auditorium would be, so that we could create a bridge and access this central node where we see this reception area. And then through that node, we would move up along a column into the building. Now, I had taken the building and just as we had prepared it at the end of the last lesson, gone and rendered out the three views. I added this extra camera, this one over here. I had then gone and sketched over it on top of an overlay sheet, a transparency paper. Then I had scanned it and basically overlaid it in Photoshop to show you this end result. So what I had basically put together, and this obviously is where you can let your own creativity come into any process. So I'm just showing you a process which is quite arbitrary and random, but it'll at least show you two different types of modeling skills that you'll learn in this course, being a very simplified geometric and minimalistic form, as well as something more organic, which is going to be the central element in the middle. So what this essentially is that the entire expo and auditorium is going to be packaged into one elevated massive superblock. This is going to represent essentially the man or the man-made objects that have been created in this world. And essentially, I would like it to look as if it was an object that literally landed out of space. It's going to look metallic, it's going to look completely monolithic, it's going to look incredibly simple on the outside. On the inside though, we're going to have quite a complex steel structure that we will want to see, and part of that steel structure is going to be held up by the elements that are going to be representing nature. What this essentially means as a concept is that nature is supporting all of the man-made things that we are doing, but yet we believe that we are so disjointed from it. And it is quite intentional that as you enter, you go up through this tree, being the world tree or the central axis, and the tree itself, or at least plant life and organic life, is holding and supporting human existence on this planet. So the other interesting concept that we will be looking at and modeling is that the entire platform is going to be flooded. Essentially what that means is that a pump would bring water from the river, push it up onto the surface, and it would just run down and naturally off this barge. What that essentially also does is it lifts up the entire building. It makes it look as though it's floating above ground completely and above the water, and especially it's going to give us an amazing reflection of the building from the surrounding areas. So besides that, the other thing that I want to mention is that the back of house areas, all of these two columns or these two spines that we had gone and modeled, those are going to be integrated into the building. I don't know if you can see if I zoom into this. Basically, if we are looking at this as a section cutting through the building, the structure is going to be running along the length through these two axis points. So that is where all of the back of house is going to be housed, and there's going to be a large steel shell structure that will basically allow people to move freely, and they'll also be able to move across this back of house structure through that through the construction once it is completed. But the course really isn't about structural engineering, even though this would be a structural feat of its own kind. Really what I want to show you is how you can represent these far-reaching concepts which may seem a little bit out of this world, and how we can quickly go and model them and represent them with as little time spent as possible. Now, throughout this course, what I'm going to be doing is also speaking a lot about how to think, how to organize your workflow so that you can make your work much quicker. Now, the first thing that I want to say on that note is that it's not really about how quickly you move your mouse or type on your keyboard or how many keyboard shortcuts you know. It's really about the process and how much of the unnecessary steps you can strip away so that you only focus on what's important. So really what I'm getting at here is that you need to try to work roughly, try to forget any precision, try to remove all of those elements of your workflow that hold you back and slow you down. The other thing that really slows people down is decision making. When it came to the sketch, I didn't do 5 options. This is the first option. It is the first sketch. And very often your first idea is the best idea. So I know this lesson is really mainly talking and not really modeling, but actually the talking is more important, because what I would like you to understand throughout this course is that it's not how well you can model, it's how little you need to do to get the end product completed. And that really is the secret to getting your modeling and getting a speed modeling workflow. It's actually not the speed, it's the minimalism of action to arrive at your destination. So that said, let's go directly into our building now, and I'm going to be putting this away off screen, but I'm going to still view it, or at least I have it printed out underneath me, and I'm going to start modeling these elements. So let's go ahead and start by creating this large super block first. First thing that you'd want to do is have a look at what height you would like to have this block starting at. So a good way to do that is simply go and model a box on top of your platform, and let's say that we would like a height of about 12 meters. I know this may seem really high and we may bring it down slightly. Let's try a figure of 8, and that should probably be fine. So now these two blocks are going to be merged into one building, but we also need to remember that we need to integrate the back of house areas which are going to be pushed inside the building. What that means is that if I take these two elements now and I bring them inwards, so if I look in plan, I'm going to go and move them into the center of the building. And somewhere along those two lines, I'm going to have the structure. Now at this point, it's a good idea to create a new shelf for yourself. Let's say we're going to do something that looks like this. And we're going to make it 45 wide and 100 meters long, even though that seems extremely big. Then we're going to move everything up into the correct height. Let's just have a look at that block that we created for ourselves. And then we're going to start dividing this block up so that we can create our structure. So essentially you have to think of the modeling process as if it was a sculptor working out of a block of stone. You really want to start working roughly on the big object and then start adding detail very, very slowly. Don't go and over detail an element and then carry on with everything else. Try to keep everything at the same resolution as you fine tune the building bit by bit. So next part that I'm going to do is decide where the central axis is going to be. Now generally if I'm working with proportions, I would want to try get a golden ratio, so something along more or less this axis over here. And you can even go and add in a few construction lines for yourself in a different color if that helps you. I could also go and work out that 1.618 proportion if I did want to keep that natural golden mean in place, and I may go and adjust that and calculate it in my own time before the next lesson, because it would be quite an interesting element to have. Next, you want to position the element which is the central spine. So to get all those main lines, let's take this large block which is going to be the extremity of our building. I may also just make it slightly shorter because I do believe that it's quite big, and certain areas may actually be double volume inside. So I'm going to bring this down even further, and I'm just making it slightly smaller so that the building isn't completely overscaled. The other thing which is very important is to decide how high you want it. Now this could be done in a real-world project in conjunction with an engineer, but you also don't want to wait for an engineer to make a 5-day decision before doing your building. So make a calculated guess. You could say that your structure at the top and the bottom would occupy 2 meters on both sides. That means 4, and you want your internal space to be at least 10 meters. So we could say we'd like a building of about 14 meters in height, and that will give you ample room in case you want to squash a few spaces down to 5 meters or 4 or even less, so that you can basically start working on that. The other thing which is very important is try to have a look at the proportions of the main facade. If you believe that this is too narrow, it may be a good idea to make it a little bit longer, and you could even try to bring it a little bit lower so that we get a very nice proportion. And it's important to get those things right first while looking at the numbers, while looking at the volumes, because these decisions are ultimately going to shape your entire building. Next, let's go and isolate these elements, and we're going to create our first construction line. So I'm going to add a length segment, and I'm going to add one width segment, and using an editable poly, I'm then going to start moving things around. Now, I'm going to pause the video right now and just do a quick calculation to find out where this golden mean is, and then we're going to derive and generate everything off that ratio. So I've just gone and moved this line slightly across based upon my calculation, and I'm now going to move that reference line as well. So what I can do now is essentially I have the main mass of the building. This is the outer envelope with my construction lines, and this is going to be my deriving form for everything that I'm going to do. In other words, when I base my axis of symmetry, it's going to be on that line, and the axis of entrance is going to be on this line, as well as the main spinal tower for the entrance of the building is going to be on that point. So that is it for this lesson. All I wanted to do is essentially speak to you and describe the process and the thoughts that you need to get a habit of thinking so that you can strip away all those unnecessary things in your workflows. And we're going to jump into the secondary part of this building where we go and model up this tower, and we're going to start modeling up the other main elements on our Expo Pavilion.